I'm Michael, and welcome to The Journey. Today, we're going to be talking about connection and bonding with your dog. Where does it go wrong? Your dog comes into your life as an asset, and sometimes they become a liability, and then you have to work and train to get them to become an asset again. Where do we go wrong? Well, let's listen. My co-host today is Glenn Cook. He's a trainer in Australia, and he works with his clients in building this bond. And so let's see what his journey is and how he works with his clients every single day. Hello, Mr. Glenn. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks, Michael, and welcome everybody to the room. So yes, my name is Glenn Cook. I've been a professional dog trainer now for just over 30 years. Which means two things. A, I'm old, and B, I've been doing it for a long time. So we've been working, I've been working predominantly on a couple of different things in the field. One of them was my initial introduction to dog training, which is more focused on law enforcement training. And then that transferred over to detection work. So I started predominantly in law enforcement, which led to detection work because sometimes those paths cross readily. From there, I started getting more involved in explosive detection. We were focusing quite predominantly on doing port authority work. So we were working on all the ports around the eastern seaboard of Australia. And from there, I moved into judging for Noseworks. So a colleague of mine brought Noseworks to Australia and was kind enough to invite me into the fold and asked me to judge competitions. And I've had a ball doing it ever since.
Wow, that's a lot. And I'm excited that you talked all about that because we're going to be breaking all that down today. So let's talk about your journey. I want to start with your journey. You mentioned inside of our last room that you were working with your family and then you started thinking about working with dogs. Tell me about that journey. Where did you start? How did you start working with your family? What attracted you? What was that moment that pivoted you to start working with dogs and eventually just go full force into dogs?
That's a long ass story, Michael, but I'm happy to share it because I think we've got some time to talk about it. So my initial interest in dogs was sparked when I was a boy, and we got a German Shepherd. And because if I sort of cut to the chase, quite a few people in the industry know me as being a Rottweiler guy because Rottweilers eventually came on to becoming my heart dog and a dog that I spent a long time in my career working with and helping people with a lot of problem Rottweilers in Australia. But before that, I was originally a German Shepherd person. So we had a German Shepherd, absolutely loved her, had some fantastic adventures. And this was when I was still in primary school. So I remember her fondly. I remember all the years that we had. We used to live in a hilly location, which was really surrounded by a lot of forest in Victoria, Australia. And we used to, like when I was a kid, me and mates and the dog used to always go trekking through the forest. And we always felt safe because we were with this dog and she was very, quite naturally protective anyway. But she would always come with us on our little journeys. But that sort of kicked my interest in dogs. It was also largely attributed to my uncle Lee, who was, when I was growing up, he was predominantly one of the very most important people in my life. He was a real character, great sense of humor, which I'd like to believe that I attributed a large amount of my humor from him. He was a very funny guy. His hobby was always fishing and shooting. And because he was into shooting, he always had a gun dog around him that he was training up at some stage. And I used to watch him spending time training his dog. He'd take me on most adventures. So, most school holidays, I'd be spending time with him going off. We'd be trekking around somewhere on somebody's farm or at a lake or something like that. And this dog was always with us. And, like whether we caught a fish or anything like that, the dog would go down and get the fish and bring it back. Or if he'd, shoot a rabbit or something like that, the dog would run off and grab the rabbit and bring it back. And it just always amazed me how he could get the dog to do this. And while I was young and I used to ask him like a million questions all the time, he used to just tell me that it was magic and he could talk to the dog. And I always found that quite amusing. He did reveal that, like he spent a long time training the dog and he learned from friends and colleagues of his that were interested in the same activities. But he was the one that sort of kicked me largely into gear that, that you could have this much better relationship with a dog if you spent time training them. And I think he was one of the first people that told me that, that dogs aren't just beings that hang out in the backyard and chase sticks and so forth. There's quite an array of intelligence inside their head. And I didn't really think too much about anything involved in the career at that point in time. I remember casting back again to the German Shepherd. I remember Mum encouraged me to take her down to one of the local dog obedience clubs. And the people that were there were just awful. They were terrible communicators. They were quite arrogant and egotistical the way that they would speak to people. And I really had a bad experience there. And I think that was one of the reasons that I sort of dropped it, because I kind of thought, dog obedience schools are full of jerks and it's a really negative place to be. That was up until I got a Rottweiler cross puppy that a friend of mine, we were living in a house together and we bought this dog. We co-owned this dog that we bought out of the Trading Post, which is basically like, Gumtree or a trading feature in a newspaper. Went and saw it, with the mother and so forth, and picked it out. It was a great little pup. Didn't know anything about Rottweilers or anything back then. Thought it was a Rottweiler, but it turned out to be a Rottweiler cross. So I was in a job at that point in time. I was actually an electrician, commercial electrician, working on fridge cases and so forth. And when you were talking about my family before, Michael, that's where my family were happy that I was getting involved in this trade, and that I was earning, quite good money as a young guy working in this field. And my grandmother was quite a social snob, because some of my family came from money, and she was quite societal. And when she found out that I was taking a very large interest in dogs and thinking of shifting careers, she basically called a family intervention and called me in before her and my aunts and uncles, and sat me down and basically said, you're working with animals and training dogs and horses and so forth is reserved for people like carnies and gypsies and so forth. And she really gave me the third degree about it. If you knew my grandmother, she was a very, very intense presence, very strong matriarchal part of our family. And she could send people running no matter who you were. She had a very powerful dialogue. So I actually stood up to her on this occasion and I said, listen, I'm not enjoying the job. I'm loving spending time with this dog. I've met a group of people that I met through, I was doing martial arts at the time, and that's where I met my original mentor. And I was explaining to my family that I really felt a click, and this made sense to me for some reason, like hanging out with dogs and dog people for some reason had resonance in my brain, and it made a lot of sense to me. Where working the job, I just felt dead inside all the time. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel complete. There was just, I'd come home tired all the time, and I felt just a sense of agitation. Whereas when I was working with animals, in particularly with dogs, I felt happy and content. It just, as I said before, repeating the same thing, it made me feel complete. So she wasn't happy about it at all. She thought that, that was completely beneath me. And at the time, there wasn't a lot around about dogs and dog trainers. Obviously there were dog training schools around in Australia, but it wasn't like United States and Europe where they're steeped in more history about working with animals. Australia has more of a droving experience, and, dogs were more considered more farm stock and so forth around about that time. It wasn't as popular. There was popularity around it, and it was growing, but not as popular. However, cutting ahead quite a few years after I'd been involved in it, she soon changed her tune when she saw me on TV. I was being interviewed on a program about training and behaviour, and she saw me and was absolutely delighted that I was on TV and that I'd been on there a couple of times, and she got to brag about me. So she settled down after that, and she was far more comfortable. But yeah, it took some time. It was a difficult process to get her through.
I love it. I can picture her now. And, I guess your inner carny person just was dying to get out to be with the dogs, huh?
My grandmother didn't mix with words. She was, she was one of those old, I'll say what's on my mind and you just have to cop it sort of people. And she had a knack of managing to insult everybody. Even though she was a devout Christian, she still had quite a silver tongue on her. I loved her to death, and she was a great grandmother and I guess one of the reasons she was so intense about this is because she cared deeply about me. Like I was the favourite grandchild to her, and she was all she wanted me to do was succeed and live a happy life. But sometimes grandparents and parents can get confused about what that is, and they think a happy life is a life through their eyes. But regardless, I pushed on and I rebelled against her initial thoughts and stuck with this career. And to be honest, mate, there's been no regrets really. The working with dogs has been a very favourable existence and one that I can look fondly on over many, many years. I wouldn't always say that exchange has been wonderful with some of the colourful people I've met along the way, but that's going to happen regardless. I mean, you can't avoid working with people when you're working with animals. I know there's a lot of people, especially students that I teach in the National Dog Trainers Federation, who think that they're going to escape people if they come and work in a dog career. And I said, well, it doesn't really work like that. Regardless of whether you're trying to hide from people or not, you're still largely involved in the lives of people. Even when you're working in rescue centres and kennels and so forth, you're still working with people. You still have to, communicate and contact people and so forth like that. So the great thing about it is you get the counselling and the companionship of working with a lot more dogs. So I understand why they want to do it. And I also understand that with some people, like I said, with me, it makes complete sense. For some reason, we're drawn to something. And, most of the people that I know that have been successful in life, in one way or another, have always echoed these thoughts that you shouldn't ignore that pull that's existing inside your soul. Like when you're drawn to something so strongly and you have that sort of magnetic resonance towards something, why would you be resistant of that? Why would you ignore that feeling in search of something else that you're not happy about? Because, I think that a lot of
we lost you. Are you there, Glenn? I can't agree with Glenn more about finding that space and finding that what the universe is bringing to you and actually, following your heart. And Glenn, you're saying this, it's like so many people don't follow their heart and they end up in a 9-to-5 and they're like, what am I doing here? And they end up working to live. And it's not really the ideal place for a lot of people, but they find themselves there. And I'm hoping that in this last year with the pandemic, it really allowed that open space for people to be home, sit with themselves. Maybe they were out of the office like most people, locked down, and they had a chance to sit with themselves and go, wow, what's really going on with my life? I've seen so many people here on Clubhouse that have started new businesses, and I'm hoping that that's been a positive reflection on the pandemic, is the fact that they had that moment, they had that awakening, and then they started following their dreams. So I'm hoping that you're back, Glenn. I'd love for you to pick it up.
Sorry, mate, did I drop out?
Yeah, you did. When you were saying like a lot of people that they don't follow their heart, they don't follow that calling, and you were kind of following that calling.
It's an incredible thing that, I was doing the math the other day, and through the NDTF, the National Dog Trainers Federation, I've been teaching students on that for the last 15 years. And, there's been several thousand students that have gone through on my courses. And I get to share some wonderful experiences with these people because they come from all walks of life. We've got people who are mathematicians. I've had somebody who's been involved in geographical engineering. So they've been building weather balloons to send into space and so forth. There's been an array of different people, scientists, mums and dads, police officers, young people, much older people, everyone in between. And, like when we sort of get to know each other a little bit and we do the introduction at the start of the class, I always ask them, and I'm always curious, why this field? Why the change? What drew you to this? And most people sort of say the same thing that they did. They kind of say, I just had an intense feeling that I needed to be working with dogs because like when they get down to the nitty gritty of it, they explain that they're fundamentally unhappy with what they're doing in their life and it doesn't make sense to them and they feel a very monotone existence in their life. But when they're working with dogs, it seems to brighten their day. And not everybody does it with the intention to change fields. Like they don't always get in it and say, I'm absolutely looking for a career in dogs. This is not what I'm doing. They're just saying this is the addition to their life, which is just going to make them feel happier and more content to have a dog as a part of the companionship in their life or being involved in helping other people or whatever it may be. There is a large amount of feedback from that. But I also get a large amount of people who do say, it's time for a career change. I want to shift gears. I want to get out of my mundane job and I want to get into something that I really just enjoy doing. They understand that it's going to be a considerable drop in pay. Sometimes it depends on how successful they become or what field they choose to get involved in. But regardless, they're still accepting of that and they're still happy with that. And largely I was too. I mean, I dropped considerable pay when I left my field 30 years ago and then went into professional training. It was a different exchange up until I sort of found moderate success in it. And then I had a different experience altogether.
Well, I work with a life coach every week, and we were talking about this morning, and it's so interesting that we're having this conversation right now. And what you're saying is the fact that I was working with Liz Murdoch, and I don't know if you know Liz in Clubhouse. She has a podcast called Talking with the Dogs, and she communicates with dogs and animals after they've passed or just about to pass, and she can really have this conversation with them. And we were talking yesterday, and it was pretty amazing because she's kind of stumbling on this whole area of like how beautiful animals are always in alignment. And I think dogs are just one of those beings that they are just born in alignment and they stay in alignment. They love you unconditionally. And so I'm not surprised to hear that you're attracted to it. I'm not surprised to hear that so many other people are attracted to being inside the animal kingdom, I call it, the dog world. And I love the journey of like where people started and how they got into it. And that's why I named YouTube The Journey, because it is a journey. And I've heard like your wife, Narelle, look at her. She's a nutritionist and she started in the human side and then slowly she branched over into the animal side and the dog side. And she knows so much information about dogs. And it's like, here you are, the same thing. 30 years ago, you decided to make this pivot in your life and make a change for something that's going to make you happy rather than sitting there, let's say, twisting wires for the rest of your life. You're now getting to be outdoors, working and creating a difference, not only for the dogs, but for the owners of the dogs. And so I can totally understand why people come to dogs and why they hang out with dogs, because they love you unconditionally. And there's a communication there that you have with another soul that you just don't have with another human being sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. There's somebody in the audience that I've mentioned a few times. He's a good friend and a colleague in the industry to a lot of people and a mentor and coach to a lot of other people too. His name's Jay Jack. He is an incredible communicator with dogs and with people as well, like just a great coach. And some people just have a tenacity to really deep dive into not only the psyche of dogs, but also people as well, and help them bridge the gap that's existing largely in their lives. And that's, like when I see people who are largely successful in this field, that's one of the areas where they're really proficient in, is helping people understand that we can speak another language. And fundamentally we're speaking and, like teaching an animal how to exist in a human world and how to fundamentally work with all the trials and tribulations, I guess, in living in a human world. And when you look at how many people really struggle with their animal, and it's a large amount, because I mean, when we're sort of all hanging together as dog people, we don't see it as such because we're sort of collaborating with people who already get that and understand it. But we're the minority. We're a very small group of people. The majority of people out there who have got animals don't understand them and have a large degree of blockage in getting through to their dog or, to a lesser degree, their cat. And no offense to cat people, I've got a cat, but let's talk dogs because that's the field that we're sort of in. But when you've got people like Jay and the lady that you were mentioning before, and certainly an abundance of other people that I can think of off the top of my head, they just have this incredible ability to be able to explain what it is, and then not only explain it, but then also show it. So there's proof in the pudding in what they're doing all the time. I'm thinking about Jay at this point in time because he's here, and I've got a deep amount of respect for him. He started this sport up in America, which is spread around the world, and it's making a lot of gains in Australia as well, called GRC. And it's a very inclusive dog sport that allowed a lot of dogs that most people would, give up or put them into welfare or even euthanize them because they just don't understand them and they're not making the time to allocate certain easy applications that these dogs need just to have a much better and fulfilled life, and then be able to, in a far better way, find it easier to communicate in the household that they're belonging to. And because of people like Jay and other people around the world who are allowing people to do this sort of thing, and this is where other dog sports like Noseworks, which also is hugely and vastly inclusive for a lot of people and their dogs. It's given people a lot of space to get off the couch and to find, hey, I can, the dog understands me, like we get each other, and I can do something with this. And not only can I do something, but there's life beyond the living room. Like I can get out and we can do all these fun activities with the dog. And, not only can I do fun activities with the dog, but I can also get involved in some fun competition, some lighthearted competition with some colleagues and meet a whole bunch of people that I didn't know existed. And that's the conversation I have with a lot of these people is that, now suddenly they have a breakthrough into a world that they never knew existed. They don't feel like it's just a mundane existence, that they get up, have breakfast, go to work, come home, make dinner, and then go to bed and repeat and do the same thing over and over again. Now they have this interesting activity, hobby, jobby, or whatever you want to call it, where they can actually get involved with their dog. The dog is not just occupying space in the backyard anymore. The dog is not just sitting at the foot of the bed anymore. Like you and the dog are actually a team now. You can find that this is a very coachable situation for both of you, not just the dog, but also for the handler as well, in that you can learn to be much better or find a much more enjoyable life rather than just have this living this non-existent life. It's quite interesting. It's quite diverse as well.
I think it's so beautiful because usually here with us and we have a conversation with her as well, is that what I am seeing around the world now that I've been on Clubhouse and talking to people like you and others around in different countries is that depending on your area, it seems like, because like we were talking to Kristen a couple of weeks ago and she was in Pandemic Puppies, and she was talking about how she really hasn't seen that big of an impact to the dogs or the people in her area. And it's because, like exactly what you're talking about, she gets up, she works her dog out, she gets her dog warmed up, and then they go truffle hunting out in the forest or out in the timbers. And it's just like a whole experience for them, and they get to bond. And her bond with her dog is just so incredible. And I was talking about this yesterday with Liz about what you were just talking about too, is like the leash. Let's talk about the leash. Who's walking who? Is the dog walking the parent, or is the parent walking the dog? And why is the leash one direction? It's actually both direction. It's actually one solid like tubing, let's say, of energy going back and forth, and that is shared between the owner and the pet. But yet, Glenn, you see like exactly what you're talking about. There's a handful of people that get that, And then there's a handful of people that struggle to find that. When you're working, and this is perfect segue to get you into where you're working with your people, when you're working with people and you see that they're struggling with this motion of connecting with their dogs, and especially you knowing how much you know about the ability to be able to connect and how beautiful it is, where do you start with their frustration to help them maybe break through to be able to find that connection?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, I'm going to reference something that I learned from Jay, and he brought up quite a few times, called the layered stress model, which I love, and it's a really easy understanding of how a small problem can quickly escalate into a large problem. And you might find that it's not initially that problem that caused the blow up, but because of a lot of other underpinning issues that have gone along in your life. Jay doesn't much. Actually, can we bring Jay up? I'd love him to talk about the layered stress model, just so people get an idea of it if he's available.
Yes, I just invited him. So let's see. Hey, Jay, come on up.
Coming up, Jay. I'd love you to talk to the group about the layered stress model.
What's going on, guys? How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, man. I think that layered stress model is something I learned from Chad Mack, and it was his idea. But I have been a real big proponent of trying to push it towards people. But just understanding that the presentation of the issue is not always the problem that it seems in the beginning. Like if your partner came home and you had slightly undercooked the meatloaf, and they freaked out and threw the meatloaf across the room, no one would go, we need to counter condition this person for their meatloaf reactivity issue. Everybody would go, holy shit, something terrible has happened. Like, what is going on? What is the actual problem? You know, but a lot of times with dogs, when they have like an issue with the leash or an issue with whatever, some reactivity issue, everybody goes immediately to trying to work on that particular thing instead of really looking at the dog in a little bit of a more holistic manner and going like, what are the layers of stress that I can peel back? Like, are they biologically fulfilled? Are they healthy? You know what I mean? Has there been clarity in their life to the degree that they can understand what's expected, what's going on, and what to do in the situation or whatever? But I always find that peeling those layers back makes it easier for people when they're dealing with stuff, because instead of the thing being the problem, they get into the process of trying to fulfill the dog's life, fix the bigger issues, which makes the smaller issues people have to kind of sort out.
I hear this all the time. I love that you're sharing this, Jay, is like what is the bigger issue? Like, it's not about they didn't like the raw meatloaf and throwing it across the room. There's something that like really happened. And the same thing with dogs. And we talk about this too. It's like, we find, or I'm finding a lot in the conversations that I'm having here in Clubhouse with trainers, with behavioralists, and what they're talking about is a lot of times people set their expectations up for their dogs so high that the dog can't even succeed to get there because they're not even there yet. But still, I love the fact that what you brought up is the fact the way we look at it, we're humans and we do look at things like that. We look at our life like that all the time. But on the opposite side, what you're talking about too, is if you look at the dog looking back at us, the dog is unconditional and he's like going, oh, okay, they're having a bad day. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. So can you, like, when did you first started studying this, and where did you get this information from? Or is this something that you came to a conclusion by working with your clients?
No, not at all, man. Chad Mackin was a huge influence on me early on in dog training, and one of like my main influences. I would say probably the two biggest influences that I've had on my path have been Chad Mackin and Ivan Alabama. Two drastically different dudes, but like I kind of got both. I kind of got a little bit from each as far as like the way they influenced me. But Chad Mackin came up with the layered stress model and taught it to me. We talked about it a lot. We used to have a podcast. It's off the air. It's been off the air for a little bit, but we had a podcast called Dog Training Conversations. The library is still up if people want to look for it. But yeah, we talked about the layered stress model on that all the time. And I took his idea and kind of codified it. I didn't, come up with it by any stretch, but I had one of my students who's a cartoonist make like a little cartoon of a volcano, and I kind of distilled the layers down into 5 5 basic layers. It just made it, like, I've been teaching my whole life. So teaching is a passion of mine, teaching you as well. And when I saw the concept, I thought it was a really good concept, but the way it was being presented was a little bit complex. So we just kind of distilled it down and made a little visual learning thing for people to take away from it. So that's been kind of getting put around kind of all over the world now, which is pretty cool. I feel pretty lucky to have been able to be part of that information getting out, but it certainly wasn't my thing.
And how does this play in with your GRC?
Well, so GRC is a dog sport in and of itself. So it doesn't matter how you train for it. It's like AKC obedience. You can train however you want so long as you compete, follow the rules. Like GRC is a dog sport in and of itself. And so because it's a dog sport, we don't demand that people train a certain way or train in a certain paradigm or follow certain principles or whatever. They just have to show up and do the parameters of the sport. So in the sense of what is it, it doesn't really have anything to do with the competition of GRC. However, I believe any dog trainer that has an understanding of how to make reliable results with a dog understands inherently. Some people call it trigger stacking. Some people refer to it as the layered stress model. Other people will say you have to, whatever. Like, it's a concept that almost every solid dog trainer understands intellectually. So I think it's part of everybody's training plan that's involved with GRC, whether they refer to it as that or think they got it from us or just have an inherent understanding of how beings work and learn, But it's not an official part of GRC in that respect. Because GRC is a sport, not the way I train.
I asked that only because, like I was mentioning earlier, that I work with a life coach, and I've been working with him for 15 years, and we talk about alignment and being in alignment at a high vibration. And when you're there, when you play in a high vibration, you attract people from a high vibration. If you're down at the low vibration, you're going to be attracting people from a low vibration. And what we're talking about here, and exactly how Glenn was opening up, and like what opened up his eyes to the whole world of dogs, was that he was attracted to the dog's vibration. I'm going to use that right now, Glenn, for you. And he was just like, because dogs are so much in alignment. I mean, dogs are born in alignment, I think, and they die in alignment. And it's just so beautiful to spend time with the dog because they love you unconditionally. So I'm just asking that question because I'm thinking, here you've got this GRC competition that you've created. And I was thinking with your background, your method of understanding this layer stress model probably plays into a lot of like how you actually develop this game. What's your thought on that?
Well, if you would talk about alignment, it's not so much a layered stress model. For me, I grew up with game bred dogs, and I was raised a fighter myself. You know what I mean? So like for probably a few decades at least, I made my money fighting professionally. So if anybody, it's MMA or what a lot of people would refer to as UFC. But until 2000, it was illegal. So like my life was fighting illegally. That was the way I made my money. So like I was in the same circle, grew up in the same circle as people fighting their dogs. And when I was around 14 or so, I got out of that world and started pursuing my own life outside of it and was violently opposed to dogfighting, but I continued to fight in the human world. But then it's like I watched all these people around me that were living with these kind of game dogs or dogs from game bloodlines and just falling short because they couldn't live well with their dogs because their dogs were getting no biological fulfillment. Because of course it's wrong for dogs to be fought in a pit. Obviously, clearly, you know what I mean? That's wrong. But just because you're not going to fight them in a pit doesn't mean they have to live on a couch doing nothing. You know what I mean? And for a long time, people tried to push me into a good place in this world, and it was just unable to be done. I mean, I was constantly in trouble. I was constantly in the wrong side of the law because I had the urge to fight. And it wasn't until somebody went, man, you need to put this thing that you have somewhere productive. And they put me in a ring, and they put me on a weightlifting platform, and they put me in a boxing gym or somewhere, you know what I mean? And gave me a place where instead of what I was being a shitty thing to be frowned upon, what I was something to aspire towards and something to move towards and be proud of. And it's how I made my living. And for a long time, it's how I traveled the world. I mean, my wife and I went to St. Petersburg and fought at Putin's palace one time for, you know what I mean? Like just crazy things I could have never achieved were it not for fighting. You know what I mean? And I learned to turn my life around to be a productive member of society and a good person by finding a way to channel what I naturally was into a thing that this world can accept. And I kind of replicated that for the dogs, or at least that was my goal, was to have a place for these dogs to be celebrated and not looked down on, and find a productive way for them to be who they are and still be in this world well, you know, like navigate this world skillfully, but still be who they are. So I feel like as far as alignment goes, that to me was the thing, was I wanted to give them a place to find what I found, you know?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Guys, I got a jet. I'm pulling up to the house. I got a jet. It was nice talking to everybody. Thank you.
Hey, Jay, pleasure. He's right in alignment with what we're talking about with our relationships with dogs. And you made that migration to dogs. He made that migration to dogs. I want to get back to you really quick about where we started with this question, and you brought up layer stress model, was like when you're working with a client and you see that they don't have that connection, and you know how beautiful that connection is, and you know they can have it, how do you start them off? What baby step do you start them in so that they can start working with their dogs to build this connection?
Yeah, another good question, Michael. You know, referring back to the layered stress model that we've been talking about just over the last couple of minutes with Jay, two of the big issues, big ticket issue items that I find throughout my career, and other people may agree or disagree with this, but it's certainly my experience. And when I've been consulting with colleagues in the industry, you know, and comparing notes on it, we're all finding very, very similar items. And there are two major issues where I find there's a massive breakdown in dog ownership, which will often lead to, again, whether the dog is removed from the home and put up for adoption to rescue, or if the dog is euthanized simply because of one of these two minor issues, which is generally pulling on the lead and jumping up. And over the span of my career involved in it, they're the two issues where I find people are right on the cusp of giving up on their dog. And that's where, you know, like that's where I sit down with them and say, there's something else going on here, isn't there? And, you know, this might be a very, it's a necessary, but sometimes it's a confronting conversation that needs to be handled delicately. And unfortunately, dog trainers inherit the burden of becoming counselors and marriage consultants and chefs and dietitians and all sorts of things. Like we get, we become honorary vets and everything. Not that we're saying we are, but you know, we get asked an abundance of these type of questions. And one of the ones that people often come and saying, you know, like, if you can't help me stop the dog jumping all over me or pulling on the lead, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm just sick to death of this dog. But it started before that. You know, the problem started before that. That's the straw that broke the camel's back predominantly. And fundamentally what it is, it's a bit of a runaway train where the relationship between the owner and the dog never really had a fighting chance to take off because they've spent their lifetime or the lifetime of the dog thus far in misunderstanding each other. And that is generally because we don't do enough to educate the dog on what is the rules of the house or what is the rules of life living with me. And unfortunately, you know, like there are some people who say, oh, well, that's not it at all, but it is. I mean, fundamentally, it comes down to, you know, dogs by default do dog behavior, and dog behavior by default is, you know, rummaging around, jumping on things, knocking things over because nobody explained the rules of the house to them yet. So, you know, it's like, if I got technical, it's like building an app. You know, an app is not ever going to become anything unless you actually put the work into it. And one of the sayings that I always say, Michael, to students on my course is that modeling clay always yearns to become something beautiful. It just needs the right set of hands on it to turn it into whatever it was destined to become. And that's exactly the same principle that happens with dog training as well, is that you need the right set of hands on it and you need the right understanding. And in a lot of cases where people are struggling with their dogs, they need access to the right type of mentor to help them. Like I know this room was originally about detection dogs or sniffing and so forth, but this all has correlation into getting there, because without this basic foundation or framework that you need to get into, it is going to be incredibly difficult for that dog to stay in the home. And, there are an abundance of dogs that are given up year after year, month after month, week after week, for some amazingly ridiculous reasons. Mm-hmm. However, they make a lot of sense to the owner at the time. Like the owner at the time, there's so much going on in their life, and the easy out sometimes is to end the relationship with the dog. But myself and other coaches in the industry, like if we're patient and we can spend time with them, we can turn that from a liability into an asset. We can turn, and that happens a lot in relationships. That can happen in friendships as well. Is sometimes it just is sitting down and reforming that connectivity to communication, because communication is a big killer. That's a problem in not only our relationship with our dog, but our relationship with our partners, with our children, with our boss, with our friends, everything like that. Sometimes it's just being too, it's like quick draw, people that pull their gun quickly or something like that. It's the same thing with people with words or misunderstanding sometimes. And sometimes, the poor old dog suffers because we just don't form an understanding or form our words correctly to teach and educate on exactly what it is that we need them to do to better slot into the world that we want them to slot into.
It kills me when you said what you said about, the liability, turning the liability to an asset. Where my mind went immediately was, wait a second, it started as an asset and it fell into a liability. And it's because of exactly what you're talking about, is that connection wasn't there from the get-go. The dog didn't have the ground rules of like how the house was run, what were the rules of the house. And so that's where I feel like dogs are always an asset when we get the dog, but they become a liability is when we don't pay attention to them. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. It always starts off in love. Or sometimes, people lust after dogs sometimes when they see them, as little puppies and so forth. And I'll give you one classic example of a problem that is ongoing in the dog world for me and most other professionals in the industry, is the jumping up asset, the jumping up problem. So what people tend to do is when they're little puppies, like a little fluffy baby puppy jumping up on you is absolutely adorable, and everybody loves it. And all the family laugh. The kids are squealing and laughing and running around. The parents think it's adorable that this little tiny little thing is jumping and yapping at you, and everyone's having a great time with that. But, time changes that little puppy into an adult, and all of a sudden the jumping up, you're talking about something that weighs a kilo or so, and then all of a sudden it turns into 30 kilos, and it's, the intensity is a lot more, and it's not attractive anymore. And you come home from work, you're tired, and old mate comes running up and jumps on you, and you think, oh God, I'm in my business clothes here, and you're jumping all over me and ripping it, and I'm sick to death of it. It's muddy outside, it's all over me. And that's conversations that I have with regular people on a day-to-day basis. However, they're blissfully unaware that they've educated the dog to do this, and the dog thinks that this is a default behavior and something to connect with you because that's what you taught the dog. And it becomes a part of the prime behavior or the mother behavior that the dog develops. And getting into things like, like we were talking with Jay about GRC and other activities such as nose works or anything else, is we can teach the dog that a default behavior is, like when I see you, I do X behavior instead of Y behavior. And the Y behavior could be jumping up. But, for example, I teach one of my German Shepherds, Randy, who was jumping on me a lot as a baby. I shaped it into a flip heel. So instead of punishing him for jumping on me and killing all that enthusiasm, what I did is I transferred the behavior into a flip heel. Like people see him do this amazing flip heel now. Like he's nearly 8 years old and he still does this flip heel where he almost his back almost bumps the under of my arm. And people say, how did you teach that? And I said, well, to be honest, for him, it wasn't hard because all I did was transferred one undesirable behavior and changed it into a desirable behavior. One where he would never get rewarded to one where he'd always get rewarded. And you can see the lights come on when you show people that, and you can get them to understand you can change behavior. Like you can use what Jay was saying before, the word counter condition. You can condition a dog from an undesirable behavior into a desirable behavior and have the dog understand, so anytime I do this behavior, I'm not getting anything from it. Like I get nothing. In fact, sometimes, like access to reinforcement or access to you or access to what I want gets shut down or taken away from me. Whereas when I do these alternate behaviors, such as, a nice drop or a flip by your side or, something, whatever it is that you wanted, whatever you find attractive or desirable or amusing or whatever it is, the dog can then change into that behavior. Now, it's like any other thing, Michael, and everybody else listening. Like I've been struggling away learning. I'm 50 years old. I've just picked up guitars, and Narelle and I are, learning to play guitar. Now, it's hard. My fingers hurt all the time. But it's interesting that after a period of time, you can hear music coming out of this board with strings on it. And the music comes from you. Like that's one of the things that a mentor that I'm learning from taught me is that you're the music. The guitar is just respondent to it. And with a dog, like the dog is learning what you want it to do. Like you're orchestrating this. So if your dog is not being obedient and the dog is not fulfilling the life that you wanted to, you have to take ownership of that and understand this one critical thing. A dog is a product of its environment.
Well, we see that all the time. It's like, they mirror their parents, they mirror their people that they're around. I love the fact that you said, dogs can pick up your behavior. I mean, what about our humans? They just can't pick up the dog's behavior sometimes and understand the dogs. And I think that's where the mishap happens. What I'm learning so much about here in Clubhouse is how a lot of times you guys being trainers are basically training the parent most of the time to really be able to understand the dog.
Yeah, that's understandable. That was something that I used to struggle with and be frustrated with when I was younger and I was involved in training. I used to think, why don't you understand this? However, there's been a lot of study about people who have access to a lot of information. Like, let's say, for example, they become very competent with any skill set and that they're communicating with learned colleagues who understand exactly what it is they're given field, like dog training or rocket science or whatever it is. So when they're communicating with each other, they're all communicating in a language that everybody understands and gets. When a novice person walks in and they don't get it, they forget about the journey it took for them to become novice to expert. And they, they'll show something and say, here it is. It's simple, right? And the person will go, sometimes they're embarrassed to say, no, it's not. And they'll just sort of nod their head and go, yeah, I guess so. But they don't really get it and they don't understand. So that was something for me that I had to overcome myself. It just, I guess it's part of being ignorant or even arrogant or even egotistical sometimes, is that you have to understand sometimes they just don't get it because it's never been something that either it's been shown to them or they've cared to understand up until now because there's no practical application for it. But when that changes, you've got to change your mindset also to teach that person. Now is the time that we've got to go back to the basics. We've got to create a incredible foundation and we've got to spend time, really learning the basics before we can start moving into the advanced stuff or something that might be a bit more interesting. And I think it was Vince Lombardo who was quoted as saying, excellence is the mastery of the basics. And it's something that I find myself going back to regularly. And, sharing my guitar experience before, Michael, that's one of the things that when I find myself becoming sloppy on anything, I always return back to the basics, back to before it became corrupted. And I do that now with dog training as well, is when I can see something going wrong, like I want an A to B journey with my dog, but I accept it's an A to T journey because, B was a wrong path and C was a wrong path and D was a wrong path. But that's okay because I can course correct and I can go back to, where the path wasn't corrupted, I can find that resetting point, and the dog and I can continue the journey off from there, because it's very important that we understand each other. And I take the time I need to, or the owner of the dog or the trainer of the dog takes the time they need to take in order to get the dog back to those grassroots basics of understanding this is the success point, right? This is where we both understood it. And this is the point where before it came corrupted. So let's slow down here. Let's pull this out and let's shape this journey a little easier together. And therefore the dog starts to formulate a better understanding, go, good, thank you. Now I get it because we've broken it down into increments that allow me to access it easier. I can see how this works now. And fundamentally, that's a problem that we generally find that we do have in dog training, is we're always trying to race towards the end without enjoying the setup. It's basically like trying to set something up without reading the instructions and then realizing I can't do this without reading the instructions. I need to actually, have a read through this, and this might make my life easier because now I can access all of the features rather than some of them.
I'm laughing here because my journey here is with recording, and you helped me with the mic and you helped me with the control panel. And it's like, for me, I had to do the exact same thing. It's like I had to go back to the basics. I wanted to jump over the mountain in one leap, but I knew that I couldn't. And I've learned that here on Clubhouse with the trainers that I work with in all the rooms. And we talk about this. It's baby steps. It's really baby steps. And where a lot of trainers see exactly what you're talking about is when the pet parent expects, once again, their expectation is so high for their animal, for them to understand what they think that they should be doing rather than what the dog can actually do in that process of learning those baby steps to get to the end result. And I always say this too, in the world of design, we always think that, okay, we start at A and we think it's going to start here. We have an idea that it's going to end at Z, let's say, but that path in between A and Z is never the direction that we originally think that it's going to go. And I find that when people have a tendency to have stand at A and look directly at Z and just think, okay, I'm going to make a beeline right to Z and I'm going to get to Z as quick as possible. That's when all the confusion, that's when all the mistakes happen, because they're not going with the flow or the energy or the baby steps that allow the expansion for us to get to Z.
I've spoken to a lot of people, and having the podcast has given me access to a lot more people around the world, and even Clubhouse. And people who have been, let's talk about dog training, people who have been successful in dog training will always tell you that the path to success isn't this beautiful green field, with an abundance of everything you want. It's a crooked old goat track, teetering on the edge of a cliff with a broken down old bridge, like something out of an Indiana Jones movie. It is difficult and is harrowing sometimes. And there is plenty of times where you're halfway along and you think, oh, I should just turn back. This is terrible. However, I always think of this cartoon depiction somebody sent me of a guy that's inside a mine, and he's just about to hit this massive diamond on the other side, but you can see him walking down with his head slumped, and he's dragging along the ground despondent because, like he was like an inch away from a breakthrough, but decided, I'm just not getting anywhere and this is not for me. And it's just one picture, but it speaks, like they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And I show that picture to a lot of people when I can see them so broken down and so despondent about how their dog is going and all the terrible issues that they're having and so forth. And I said, this is it, man. This is where it's at. Like you're here. There's a breakthrough about to happen, but you can't give up now, because this is, in effect, it's kind of like the ego fighting itself to stay relevant and stay alive. Where we're just saying, no, this is the day that I bury you. I'm not going to let you affect my life anymore. And it's the same thing similar thing when we're training a dog, is to teach the dog this behavior has to go, buddy. We have to change this into something else. It's not going to be reinforced from here on. And, We can have a more beautiful and abundant life by you simply understanding a few of these basic skills, and this is how they have to go down. And when you see that transition and that shift, it's absolutely amazing, but it's difficult. Nothing easy is obtained through, like I said, it doesn't fall in your lap. You have to work for it.
Yeah, you have to go down that crooked road, across that rickety old bridge to get to the end result. And when you're there, it's magic. And I go back to what you were talking about, the liability and the asset. It's really like, if you take this path that Glenn is talking about, that crooked road on the cliff, on a mountain, and it's like trees and everything in your way, but you have to get there. You can take your dog from being an asset and keep them as an asset all the way to the end of the Z. And I think talking about the liability and people getting frustrated, I love the analogy of the picture. I totally pictured it in my head, and I could see the guy where he's standing in front of the mountain and there's like an inch of surface rock left before he hits that diamond. And how many people give up on their dogs just before they discover that diamond?
Well, sometimes they don't even they don't even pick the first bit of dirt. They just they basically just give up at that point in time. And sitting down with some people, there are legitimate reasons why a dog is not suitable in some households, and I do get that. And there's like some people will say, oh, you should never give up on the dog and so forth. But I think let's talk about for the life of the dog or the sake of the dog. For the life of the dog and the sake of the dog, there are times where that dog would definitely be better in another house, where it is going to get access to biological fulfillment, and it is going to get somebody who appreciates it and is going to put the time into it, because that relationship probably won't change in some houses. I'm not saying all houses. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm saying some houses. And there are times where, as a mediator and a coach, when I'm going out and talking to people about this, there are times where, like I do sit down with the family and say, this is probably a good idea to move this dog on to somewhere where it is going to benefit elsewhere. And when they do this, the dog flourishes because it's with somebody or in an environment where it does have access to far better resources, and it has access to somebody who wants to spend time with it. Like, some people get dogs because they get pressured into it, and it should never have happened. It's a lot of impulse. But unfortunately, Michael and everybody else, we can't correct all the world problems in one easy go. The best thing that we can do is educate people to the best of our extent. I mean, I've talked a lot of people over the years out of getting dogs. I told them, you'll probably be better off with a goldfish, and I'm not insulting them. I'm just helping them. I'm helping them realize don't let your ambitions get mixed up with your capabilities.
And I think that's so true. True testament of that. Before I even got on Clubhouse, I was longing for a dog. And then once I got on the Clubhouse and started hosting all these rooms with you, brilliant people like you, Glenn, I started to realize I was not in the position to be a responsible pet parent because I'm launching a business. I'm working 24/7. And I think you really have to understand that. And I love that you're aware of that and you're just bringing that up, because it's so important that every parent out there that's going to be bringing a puppy into their life should be a responsible pet parent. Now, I agree with you too, because on last week I had a room and it was called Surrendering Your Pet. And it happens, and there is a good way to do it. There is a right way to do it, and there shouldn't be shame around it, because sometimes people will bring in a dog into their life and the dog's just not fit for that family or that home. And it's better for you and it's better for the pet, for the dog, to find the right home, to find the forever home. And so it doesn't have to be that difficult of a process to surrender. It's more of the difficult process of for you to understand this is the best for both of you. I really enjoy our conversation that we're having here, Glenn. I know I usually close the room at the top of the hour. We're over it. How's your time? I truly enjoy everybody that I've been meeting here on Clubhouse, and it's so cute because you kept saying the journey. And that's why I named the YouTube channel, The Journey, The Pet's Journey, because it really is. And it's also not just the pet's journey, it's your journey. It's like, where did you come from? And that's why I asked you in the beginning, where did you start? And you explained you started as an electrician and you just had this drive to get closer and closer to dogs. And I think it's because of your alignment. I think it's interesting too, because you said that when you first got into the dog world, that you noticed that there was a lot of trainers and they just were really aggressive in a sense, and just the way they were training and all this. And it wasn't an easy world in the beginning. Like we were talking about like 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. But what I have found here, and I would love to hear your thought on this, is what I've found here in Clubhouse is I've jumped into those rooms where it's you and 20 other trainers or 30 other trainers, and you're sitting there talking, and you guys are coming from different positions in your ability and your beliefs in training. But yet I'm seeing that there's like this openness that I see here in Clubhouse. Are you seeing that in the dog world in general?
Yeah, there's two fundamental beliefs in the training world. Well, you could categorize them under two beliefs. You know, people might say there's a few more, but it really falls to these two, which is often addressed as balance training and plus R training, positive reinforcement training. And you know, there's times where each camp, what would I say, that they probably strongly disagree with each other on some of the training principles. And I guess in some years there's been a lot of disdain for each other, which has created quite a wide gap between those two parties and those two methodologies or those two areas of thinking or belief. And it's been quite a shame, because I think that in some cases talking to each other, which has happened more so since apps like Clubhouse have appeared, where we've been forced into channels with each other and listen to each other, and not listen to each other with the intent to reply, because you can't do that when you're sitting in the audience, but also trying not to misunderstand people is something that I think we really need to strive to be better at. And it's something that I really needed to work on myself, because there are times where, you know, like you might have a belief system and nobody is going to change your mind until one day, and this phenomenon happens to a lot of people sometimes if they're lucky, is that sometimes people do. And when you are hit with, you know, like your core belief that is being changed, it is a very confronting process to go through, like extremely confronting. However, sometimes it's necessary and very important to evolve you and to force some growth into what you're doing and where you're going and who you're becoming as a human being, a better human being. And I've certainly found that in listening to other people and being more available to what they're doing, because I can access far more information by being present. So I'm not trying to make it sound ethereal. What I'm trying to do is say to people, sometimes, you know, you just need to be a part of the conversation without being judgmental. And it's incredible and enlightening sometimes what will come out of that conversation. And I've certainly found that more recently, where I have been with people that I probably wouldn't have spent much time with, and I probably would have been very guarded around them, shamefully to say. But I'm pleased to say that because I have been in rooms with them and I have listened to things they're saying, I'm thinking, not only is that important, but it's also something that I would really like to be a part of. I'd really like to have access to that myself. So it's been an incredible part of a growth journey, not only for me, but for colleagues of mine, where we've been discussing it and saying, you know, that conversation that happened the other day in Clubhouse, or, you know, those group of people that got together, there was some really profound information that was in there. And I think it's very, very beneficial to all of us, and not only to us, but to the dogs that we're training and to the people that we're working with. So, you know, that's probably some sage advice that's been given to me that I will give to other people, is that, you know, don't ever believe that the journey is over, or that you've got all the information you've got just because you've chosen a side or a technique or a belief system. It doesn't mean it's the only way, or it doesn't mean that you can't modify what you're doing and become better at it and more, or just even a better coach. Some of the other advice that I would love to give to people, which was given to me, is never make a decision when you're really, really happy, when you're really, really mad, or when you're really, really drunk. I try and give that advice to, I talk about that at work a lot with my staff. I talk about that a lot with all the students that I train. I always try and make sure that I'm in the most level of headedness space when people are asking me questions which are life-changing, because it deserves the attention it deserves. I really need to make sure that I'm thinking about the question clearly. I'm not just happy or not just mad, and it creates an impulsive decision-making process, like buying puppies, for example. And it's the same thing I tell people is don't buy this puppy just because it was the cute puppy. Buy this puppy because it's going to fit your lifestyle, that you have the time to commit to it and you have the space to provide for it, and all of the other attributes that need to go with owning this puppy, who will become a dog, a large adult or a significantly bigger adult or a more stronger adult in the future. It's advice that's been given to me fragmentically, in fragments over my life. And I believe that they really make a significant change to you as a person and you as a trainer.
I look back, I've been on Clubhouse since the middle of January. And I've got a book of all the rooms that I've hosted here in Clubhouse, and I've got over 400 rooms that I've actually hosted on Clubhouse since I've gotten on. And I say that only because that's how many conversations I've had with people and rooms that I've had, and we've had different conversations. And what you're talking about, what I've seen here is like, I remember when I first got on Clubhouse, and it was just, for me, I didn't get into Clubhouse. My intention to come to Clubhouse was to talk about design. I'm a designer, I'm a creative, I'm an artist, and I thought I was going to fall into the world of design and share my creativity and be able to share my experiences and learn from others. And when I saw that the dog world was here, I was like, interesting. I have a dog product. I'll go there and maybe I can pitch my dog product. And when I got into Clubhouse, I realized that wasn't really my mission here. And I found that because I do design work in LA and I do these events for fundraisings for rescues and dog rescues, and is that I've become this animal advocate, and I've brought people together and I'm bringing people together. But the thing that you just said is, like, when I first got onto Clubhouse, I saw that people were new and they were fresh to Clubhouse, and they had that moment where they were, I'm on my side of the track, you're on your side of the track. And then within several months of being on Clubhouse, like I said, I've been in the rooms with you guys. I hear where these people are on their side of the track, but I also see the possibility that's been opened up to them for them to actually listen to other trainers and why they do what they do and how they do what they do. And I've even heard other trainers share with me that they've actually gone to those other trainers themselves and reached out to them and said, hey, how do you really do this inside of your practice? And they're starting to open up to the possibility that their way of training, whether it's positive or balanced, isn't necessarily the right way, because every dog is different and every dog, needs to be understood, and the owner needs to know who that dog is at the time that they're actually working with them and know the dog all through their whole life. So I see that big expansion here in Clubhouse, and it's just been so beautiful for me to see. And like everybody in the room right now, thank you for holding this room with us today, listening to Glenn and I, having this conversation. I can't tell you how many of these conversations I've had with so many of these people, so many of you in the room, and it's just been so beautiful for me. And I just love it. I didn't know I was going to be falling into this space that I fell into, and now I have this YouTube channel. And thanks to people like you, Glenn, that you've helped me with, and just, having these conversations so that we can share with other people. And it's just, I love that you are able to be so positive and just be able to share your commitment to what you love doing with other people and give them the tools, because that's the winning key for life, is being able to do what you're doing. And do you ever recognize what you're doing?
Thank you for the lovely compliment, mate. I think that I recognize what I'm doing through the appreciation of the people that I work with. And I see it, I think that feedback from people is based on results. I try not to pat myself on the back. I allow where I'm doing good work. I understand that from their feedback. So, and also I want to pay you one in return. Because you were talking about how you got drawn into this, and I believe that you're a really great mediator, Michael. You do have a very profound skill at bringing people together. You've got you use great language. You're very inclusive, and you're very enthusiastic about keeping this going and keeping the industry together. And I think the world definitely needs more people.
I love what I do. I really do. And I love, like, with my company, with Healthy Positive Labs and our formulas and what it does for animals holistically, I love that. And that's where I put my life, is in spaces where I love to participate in creating possibilities, creating awareness, bringing people together, and understanding what we don't know, and learning what we don't know. I've learned, I swear, on Clubhouse, since I've been on it, if you see my office, you see the stacks of paper, the rooms that I've had, the printouts of, like, I've got a printout on you, I've got a printout on Jay, I've got a printout on Sue, Sunday. I've got all these printouts, and I make these notes on there. And it's like, for me, it's like, I look at it, and then I never thought I was going to be having this in my life, but that's the way life is. It shows up in the least expected way that you think it's going to show up. And all of a sudden, here I now have a recording studio. I've got the podcast going, and it's just getting bigger, but it's like, it's not about me. And that's where I think my passion is for animals. It's like, I never thought I was going to be so involved with animals too, with dogs like you. I've been drawn to it, and I don't know why, but maybe this is why, because it's like, for whatever reason, when I'm doing events and I have these people coming at me, like Bravo came to me and asked me to be on Beverly Hills Housewives with Lisa Vanderpump to do her foundation for the Yulong Festival and help her. And it was like, I kept finding myself, and I keep finding myself back in those positions where I'm actually helping make a difference for animals. And I love what I do, and I love what you do, and I love what everybody else does in this room with animals, because, like we were talking in the beginning, animals have an unconditional love for us, and our dogs have that. And that compassion that we can have together, and that connection we can have together, is such an incredible bond. But it takes work, and it takes people like you that are on the front lines of doing what you do to show us, the people that don't know all these ins and out of these communications with animals, to really guide us and be our mentors. And you keep saying this, you've had mentors in your life, and here you've turned around. I think now you're a big mentor probably to tons of people.
I think Anthony Robbins said it well, is that sometimes you just need to ride the shoulders of giants until the day you become a giant yourself. And I've been very fortunate to have, and still have, people in the industry that I can turn to regularly. And it doesn't matter how little or how long you've been in there. Even mentors have mentors. And you really need to flourish in that thought, because that's a wonderful thing. It's, being coachable and being and having access to this information is just incredible.
That's such a perfect word, incredible. Really, you're right. It is incredible what we're learning here. And I think all of you guys are my mentors, and I'm learning so much every single day. So with that, let's go ahead and start closing out the room. I know you're a busy guy. You got a crew that's probably waiting on you. How are you doing there?
I do have to go now, because I've got people from work that require me.